Hey everybody, welcome in. It is BetSided's Bonanza breakdown for the women's tournament. Ben Heisler, Peter Dew. I think that name just kind of came to me right off the top, but I think it works.
Yeah.
But if we're going to go ahead and break down the women's tournament, Peter, you know this. We want to do it right. So we brought in an expert in the field, somebody that has been covering women's basketball for many, many years. He is the founder and editor of the Nine newsletter, also over at the Next Hoops. You can also find him amongst the WNBA chairs for the Pro Basketball Writers Association, and also check out his newest book, which comes out in May. He is the author of the Baseball Talmud. You can follow him on Twitter at Howard Megdal. Good to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's the day after the brackets come out, so I am energized in a way that sleep does not allow for.
I think we understand that as well. We were going through all the different matchups on both sides on Sunday night as well. So I think we're all in a fairly similar boat. If you don't mind, I feel like I have to ask this on Peter's behalf as somebody who lives and dies with every New York Knicks possession. I know you covered them for many years, and we will get to the women's tournament. If you had to bet on the Knicks at least making the play-in tournament, Howard, would you bet them?
No, I would not bet on the Knicks to make the play-in tournament. And I take no pleasure in saying that, as you well know, as somebody who grew up as a Patrick Ewing fan and has cared very much about the Knicks for a very long time. But no, I think it's time to start thinking about the draft.
You hear that, Peter?
Unfortunately,
Is that all right with you?
unfortunately, I'm gonna have to agree. Yeah, yesterday's loss kind of put the nail in the coffin. They needed to win against the Grizzlies and the Nets if they wanted any chance. So it's gonna be tough.
I'm afraid so.
So Howard, with regards to the region, and we will go region by region with you. My initial thought is with regards to South Carolina, kind of just at the very top. We know where they stand metrically amongst the best, if not the best, in the country by almost every single solitary measure. An elite defensive team, top three on offensive rating. Is there a scenario that you can fathom? And again, it's a one game sample in each round of the tournament, but are they your clear cut favorite? I know they are at the sports books, but is there another team that you feel is in that same tier as South Carolina? Or are they in a class of their own?
No, I think they are. And, an even easier way to think about South Carolina is that they were the best team, in many metrics last year, and then brought everybody back and added a couple of recruits to the mix, and so it's not a surprise that they've been as good as they've been. I'm not somebody who, after the loss to Kentucky in the SEC tournament championship, came to the conclusion that they should drop below number one. They're clearly the number one overall to me as well. Now, that said, it's not the kind of gap that you had during the Breanna Stewart Connecticut years, where if somebody other than UConn had won any of the 4 seasons that Breanna Stewart was with UConn, you'd say, well, that is a shock on par with anything I've ever seen in the history of sports. There are other teams that are absolutely elite who very well could be cutting the nets down, not least of which because while South Carolina is so good, they don't run you out of the gym offensively. And so a lot of those games tend to be close. And so if they have an outage on the offensive side, the way they did against Kentucky, Kentucky can come down the stretch, make some plays and win a game. But no, they are the clear-cut favorite to me. I think they're in a tier, and then there's another tier below them.
All right, so give us that next set of teams that you have South Carolina at the top. I would
do.
imagine maybe a team like NC State and Stanford probably in that mix as well. Louisville was the last number one seed, and you guys wrote about them
Yeah.
over at the Next Hoops, sort of getting that last final one. UConn a number two seed and an opportunity for them to play basically a home game in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight round. Who are those next set of tier teams that could challenge South Carolina?
See, it's great the way you laid that out, because some of it is circumstantial and some of it is very much just where these teams are. Stanford, to me, if you wanted to make an argument that Stanford was at the South Carolina tier, I could understand it. As well as they've been playing lately, the fact that the defending champs, Tara Vanderveer knows a thing or two about coaching a team in the NCAA tournament as well. And so Stanford, to me, is very much in the mix for that national title as well. I don't see NC State quite at the same level. I do see UConn potentially at that same level. I want to know out of the first two rounds, and I'm heading there actually to Stores this weekend, where Paige Bueckers is at this point. If Paige Bueckers is anything approaching the near or player of the year candidate that she was during her freshman year and able to play 35 minutes for UConn, we're having a different conversation about them. Now, that said, they still have a glide path in a lot of ways regionally. They don't have a glide path in terms of who they have to face. That is a very difficult region for anyone to handle, UConn included, even though it will very much be a UConn friendly crowd in Bridgeport. And so do I think UConn has the best chance out of anyone other than South Carolina and Stanford of getting to the Final Four? I do. But a lot riding on what we see from Paige Bueckers and how quickly she can return to what she has been prior to her injury.
To stay on the point of UConn, kind of something I noticed too, with Bueckers being out earlier this year, it kind of allowed other players to step up. As he Fudd obviously has really come on as a extremely strong player for you. Do you think that's actually going to benefit UConn potentially in the tournament? Obviously, Paige is going to need to play, but do you think that helps them coming into this tournament?
It's what makes it possible. It's a great point, Peter. And it's absolutely where, Caroline Ducharme is another one. Azzi Fudd is somebody who, again, is not a shock, right? She was the number one overall recruit coming in. People kind of talked about UConn as like, oh, it's this mystery of how they did it. Well, they have a whole bunch of number one overall recruits from several different years. And you've got Gino Auriemma and Chris Daly figuring out how to make it all fit together. Two of the best minds in the history of the game. So I kind of was amused when people wrote them off, and to see them on the other side, oh, wow, UConn has a chance now. Well, yes, UConn has a chance now. I'd say better than that, but they do. They're in this region, just to stay on that region, round of 32, they could potentially be playing UCF, and the Golden Knights are a very tough out. They have potentially in the Sweet 16, Indiana. Indiana has such leadership in their backcourt. Grace Berger is one of the best players in the country. Ben, I know you're very upset that I'm mentioning Indiana, but that is
I'm thrilled you're mentioning Indiana.
I know. We first met at an Indiana game years ago. But
yeah, the Barclays Center.
That's right. But this, Grace Berger and Ali Patberg as a backcourt, I don't know that you're going to find a better combination in the country. And so the idea of seeing a Sweet 16 game between those two against Azzi Fudd and Paige Bueckers, that is remarkably fun. And that's before we even get to, and again, this is only if the seeds hold, and there's no guarantee of that, but an Elite Eight matchup against NC State, Elisa Cunane is somebody who I don't know that UConn has someone to match up with. Olivia Nelson-Ododo will be asked to do it. And Diamond Johnson, who was a star for Rutgers last year, is a star for NC State this year. So there really are just some really interesting matchups. Bridgeport, Connecticut is going to be rocking that night. I can tell you that for sure.
And by the way, for anybody that is curious about just where UConn is over their last 5-10 games relative to the season, obviously South Carolina at the top of a lot of these different metric reports, but via College Basketball Analytics, UConn net rating plus 55.6. That is a full, I'm trying to do the math in my head, but about a full 27 points higher than that of Princeton. They're in the 100th percentile, have an offensive rating of 121, also in the 100th percentile. And then defensively, it's them. And like you said, UCF, they're right at the top, a defensive rating of 65.4, which also puts them in the 100th percentile.
Can I just point out, like, those are really important numbers that you featured, and those are Brianna Stewart UConn level numbers. Like, yeah, that was the Stewie era. UConn teams would generally put up an offensive rating around 121. And so that's where they're at. That's the level they've been playing at. And they've been doing it in the Big East, which is a legit conference. I mean, a very serious conference in a way that, all due respect to a lot of those other programs, the AAC simply wasn't during the Brianna Stewart years. And, I was pleased to see the Big East got 4 teams in because that conference deserved it.
All right. So before we dive into the different regions, might as well stay in the Bridgeport region because we've had some fun there. Let's start sort of with NC State because it's a bit of a rough shake for them, potentially, like we mentioned, to have to go and to basically play a home game for UConn for a chance to go to Minneapolis. And then I also read over at thenexthoops.com about a couple teams that really may have gotten a rough shake from the selection committee, and Princeton is one of those teams. Now, I think they're live to upset Kentucky. I know that Kentucky obviously is coming off of a massive win against South Carolina in the SEC tournament. And then they'd have to, obviously, Princeton would have to go and beat Indiana on their home floor. That's a game in Bloomington. When you see that matchup, that 6-11 matchup in the Bridgeport region, is Kentucky maybe over or undervalued here? And then as far as Princeton goes, do you look at them as a team that can be live in this tournament for an upset as well?
When I look at double-digit seeds that are likeliest to pull an upset, Princeton is there. It's not because of Kentucky, by the way. Kira Elzy is a terrific coach. Ryan Howard's one of the best players in the country. You know, people talk about Ryan Howard all the time, but even somebody like Treasure Hunt, who was a terrific recruit and has made huge strides in this or sophomore season, there's depth there. And so Kentucky is not an easy out, but Princeton, you know, you want to go back to defensive efficiency. I'm a week out on this, but I believe as of last week, it was something like UCF and then Princeton defensively. And then North Carolina was up there, you know, and so Princeton was one of the best defensive teams in the country. Abby Myers, if you go by win shares, is, I know, top 15 in the country among any player. And so Princeton, it's a great program. You know, Courtney Bainhart did an amazing job. She moved on to UNC. Carla Berube has just made them every bit as good. And our own Jen Hatfield reported that Kathy Delaney Smith, you know, the dean of the coaches at Harvard, said this was the best Princeton team she's played against. That says a lot. There were Princeton teams that went undefeated in the regular season, starring Blake Dietrich, and they had a couple of years ago the best player in Princeton history in Bella Allard, a team that, by the way, lost to Kentucky in the NCAA tournament.
Wow. So I think this matchup, like, for me, is one of my favorite ones on this side of the bracket, just because, like, it's been a tale of two seasons for Kentucky too. Like, they started off so slow, they've won 10 in a row, obviously won the SEC title.
I think before Peter froze out, unfortunately,
Yeah.
I think he was sort of talking about whether or not maybe Kentucky. Peter, we got you back?
Yes.
Think so. Am I good?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, the question I was going to ask, and Ben kind of touched on it with the overvalued or undervalued, but do you think, depending upon who comes out of this matchup, that either one of these teams could beat Indiana in the second round?
It's so tough. I am on record saying all season, I'm not convinced there are 4 teams in the country better than Indiana. And so, again, you know, it's one of these scenarios where, like, those are 3 of my favorite teams. And essentially only one of those teams can come out of that pod, which is disappointing. So I would like to see all 3 of those teams get multiple opportunities to play and into a second weekend. Okay, it is what it is. That's the problem. You know, these are all my children, essentially, in the NCAA tournament. And so the answer to your question is absolutely. I believe either one of them can. Kentucky, you know, we see this a lot, right? We see teams that peak a little too soon. And I think that's the fear. You wonder, did they leave it all on the floor out in the SEC tournament? Are they going to be able to come in and win in that first weekend? If you're asking me where the smart money is, the smart money is on Indiana. Indiana does everything you want an NCAA tournament team to do, right? What do you want? You want players who are able to come up with a big score late in games. I just want to highlight Grace Berger, who I could talk about all day and all night. Grace Berger in the game against Iowa, down the stretch, first quarter, Grace Berger has the ball, waning seconds, knows time, knows score, knows where the holes are in the defense. Pull-up jumper from 12 is good. Second quarter, they go to stop her doing the same thing. So what does she do? She goes to the hoop and she finishes at the rim. It's just, Grace Berger has such a sense of where and when, like few players I've ever seen. I've been talking about her as a future WNBA player since my freshman year. Believe me, WNBA talent evaluators were mad that she decided to go back and play at Indiana for another year. But you know who wasn't mad was Terry Moran.
No, and me neither. I thank you.
I'm sure.
Thank you for returning back. It is much appreciated from this Hoosier fan. Let's go to the Greensboro region, and it's not by means of sort of stepping over the other teams because it's a fascinating region. But I think if we were to give sort of the collective fandom truth serum, Howard, that they would probably be rooting for chalk for that 1-2 matchup between South Carolina and Iowa for obvious reasons. You have South Carolina, that distinctive number one team in the country that is elite on both sides of the ball. And then you have Caitlin Clark in Iowa, who is the number one team in offensive rating. But if you go and focus on the other side of the ball, they fall all the way down to 108th. Obviously, it's a one size sample and anything can happen. But when it comes to at least Iowa trying to stop South Carolina, A, can they do it for a game? And B, like, if we were going to set an over-under on Caitlin Clark points, and I suppose in assists, because she led college basketball in both.
That's right.
Where are we putting that number for Iowa to be in the conversation to upset them?
Well, we're not even talking about the fact that Caitlin Clark has another level for big games. So, getting her in a spot where you tell Caitlin Clark, hey, you got a Final Four on the line, that's going to be epic. But of course, the same is true of Aaliyah Boston, who by win shares is the best player in the country. And I wrote about this at 538 actually just recently. They're both generational talents. There's been a lot of discourse about, you must only pick one. And of course, that's absurd, right? It is. Aaliyah Boston is the most important big to come out of college basketball since Asia Wilson. And Caitlin Clark is a generational talent, the likes of which we haven't seen. She does more already than Kelsey Plum did, who was one of those great combination guards who was capable of finding her teammates, who was capable of scoring at will and getting to the basket. So that is high praise. I take nothing away from Kelsey Plum when I say that, who was an elite player in the WNBA. But I want to focus on what you talked about with Iowa and defense. Last year, Iowa made the Sweet 16. They were the best offense in the country. They were 338 out of 349 on the defensive end. So I had this great talk with Lisa Bluter, their head coach, at the start of the year. I was like, how good do you need to be? Because their offense is not just Clark. Monica Zanano is one of the most efficient offensive players in the country, scoring around the rim. She's up near 70% from the field. By the way, she has a backup, Addison O'Grady, who is going to be, I think, even better than Zanano by the time it's all said and done. Oh, wow. She's a freshman. She's a great shot blocker. She's like an elite two-way center. So watch for her. Remember, I said that in 2025. Okay. Long story short, though, their three-point shooters are good, and Caitlin Clark makes it all work. And so what did Lisa Bluter say? She said, we were an A offense and an F defense last year. We need to be a C+. They've been better than that the last few weeks. They're at 108. They were around 200 a few weeks ago. They have gone up significantly. I don't mean to bring up a sore subject, but they helped really limit Indiana in the Big Ten championship game with the Big Ten champions. And so do I think that Iowa has found another level? I do. I think that would be just a fantastic matchup for the ages, 1v2. But I also think it's one of these things where when we're talking in 2027, we're going to be looking back and saying, oh, yeah, remember when those two WNBA All-Stars, those two WNBA household names played in the Elite Eight for the chance to go to the Final Four.
Then, Howard, you make a great point. Like, I think everybody wants to see that matchup, me included. I would love to see Caitlin Clark on an even bigger stage because of just how great she is. But the question I have to ask you, obviously Arizona, who was the runner-up last year, is in that region. Do you think this team, obviously no longer have Ari McDonald, but do you think a team like that can make a run that isn't a South Carolina or an Iowa in this region?
I do. I mean, we're talking Elite Eight, but man, Iowa State in the Sweet 16, a Cyhawk Classic for the ages in the regional? Yes, please, right? Arizona and Adia Barnes, they know what they're doing. They know how to get wins. And then there's going to be that second round matchup against Courtney Banghart in North Carolina if we get chalk, which that's a big if because UNLV and Stephen F. Austin are both really legit teams. That is absolutely a matchup I'm looking at. Can North Carolina hold South Carolina in check and we could see a potential close matchup and the Tar Heels come out on top? It wouldn't be a shock, right? These are two elite defensive teams. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier. South Carolina is not going to run you out of the gym. And so the advantage to that, if you're the underdog, is if you can execute, you have a chance to be in it late.
I want to ask you about the Wichita region and one team in particular that may surprise a few people, and that's BYU as a 6 seed. They, according to her hoop stats, are the number 9 rated team in the country. Like, and they're a 6 seed. Is that a product of maybe a poor strength of schedule? Were there some early losses along the way that maybe hurt them within the selection process? What do we need to know about BYU, and are they a legitimate threat to make it to the Final Four as a 6 seed in that region?
I don't think so. And I think it's just a simple question of matchups. They are one of the best offensive teams in the country. I have questions about, against some of your better teams, how they're going to be able to get stops. I think Villanova is criminally underseeded at an 11. And I don't see that BYU has a player to stop Maddie Siegrist, who is one of the top 10 players in the country and maybe higher than that. And that Villanova team came on dramatically over the final month and a half of the season. I think Villanova's going to win that game outright. But if BYU manages to win, then you're going up against Naz Hillman and Michigan in round 2, assuming that they're able to go ahead and beat American. No easy task, by the way. American won the Patriot League. And it was a very good team that also came on strong in the second half. But I do expect, I think Michigan's got too much size, too many numbers to for American to compete. Villanova, Michigan is what I expect in the second round, though, at the risk of writing off BYU.
Sticking with kind of an upset, obviously we talk about her hoop stats. Gonzaga is 12th in her hoop stats. They're a 9 seed in this region. Do you think they have a chance at giving Louisville a tough game in the second round, should they get there?
I do. I think Louisville will prevail in that one. And let's not write off UAlbany, the perennial power out of the America East. But, Gonzaga, Nebraska is also a really fun one. Nebraska can score with lots of people. Amy Williams has done a really good job with that program. So I'm loving that 8-9. But Gonzaga is, I absolutely believe, underseeded. And I do not think that is an easy walk for Louisville to the Sweet 16. If they get there, by the way, you have the potential. First of all, Belmont at the 12 and Buffalo at the 13 with Daisha Fair are fantastic teams in their own rights. But both Tennessee and Oregon, that is not going to make it easy on Louisville if they get to the Sweet 16. That Wichita is just a killer region. That's before we even get to the Elite 8, where Baylor should have been a 1 seed. Should have been a 1 seed.
So you brought up some interesting points with this region before we move on, because I think the women's tournament gets sort of a bad rep. There's not a lot of upsets. And I suppose if you go over everything since 1994, the men's side tends to have a few more along the way. Mm-hmm. Certainly from a national championship perspective, I think it's been only 1s, 2s, and 3s to ever win it. But it's 27% for a 5-12 compared to, I believe, 35.4% on the men's side. So you're still looking at, on average, 1 a year. But we're talking about a lot of these different matchups in the Wichita region. Maybe before we continue on and talk about the Spokane region as well, like, are we going to see, you think, maybe more upsets than most fans are accustomed to seeing this year? Is the tournament, at least in those early rounds, perhaps a little bit more wide open than maybe we would expect?
So a couple of reasons why the answer to that question, it's a great question, is absolutely yes. Number one is they're neutral sites on the men's side. So of course, right? In other words, if you are 1 through 4 and you're hosting, you've got 2 home games to get to the Sweet 16. Now, whether that ought to be the case going forward is a matter of some debate, and that's probably a whole other conversation. But of course, the numbers shift in the same way. It's used as essentially a stick to beat up on the women's tournament. But if you put the men's games 1 through 4 in home pods, I think you'd see similar numbers. It turns Absolutely. Out that home court advantage is a thing. I don't know if, some people on Twitter are aware of that or not. So that's one part. The other part, of course, is that the pipeline keeps getting bigger. You keep seeing more and more talent coming into women's basketball, and more folks who are not going to the same few programs, but are willing to go build their own. And so, yes, I absolutely see we'll continue to see more and more upsets. Number one, but number two, you talk about, oh, well, there's this top tier, but then you go down. I look at it a little bit different way. There are more teams in my mind where if they made a run and won 4 games and got to the Final Four, I wouldn't be shocked than ever before. There are more teams capable of winning 4 games in this tournament than ever before, just like there are more teams capable of winning 2 games than ever before. It's just an increased versatility in terms of where the best women's basketball talent is going, in part because there's more of it every year.
Howard, before we go to the Spokane region, I got to follow up on something you said. You said you thought Baylor deserved to get a 1. So
Yeah.
My question is, who do you think is the favorite in this Wichita region to come out and get to the Final Four?
It's Baylor. I mean, Louisville is an excellent team. And I just want to be clear, if Louisville makes it to the Final Four, I won't be surprised. I got to see them live earlier this year, back in December, in a real good game against UConn, back when UConn had been buried and left for dead. And that was a real good one, actually. And so I think Louisville has a lot of what it takes. And Haley Van Lith is one of my favorite players to watch in the country. Jeff Walsh just always knows what he's doing, coaching that team. But that Baylor team had to be remade on the fly. Nikki Collin is my pick for coach of the year because at Baylor, they played in the Kim Mulkey fashion, which was not taking a lot of threes, which was, pounding it inside. And Nikki turned them into an offense that is more versatile, that's more dangerous in March, and quite frankly, is going to set her players up to be better WNBA players on the other side of it. But if you had to ask me to put my money on one of those teams, it would be Baylor.
As we move on to the Spokane region, initial first glance for me felt like amongst all the 1 seeds, Stanford may appear to have had the easiest draw of all of them. Do you feel the same way? And if not, is there a team in that region that you believe is most likely to knock them out? If so,
maybe that's interesting. There are 2 different questions there, right? Like maybe the easiest path. Texas is going to be tough with Rory Harmon, who absolutely needs to be on people's radars and one of the best point guards in the country, not just freshmen, but point guards in the country. That is just, if I'm picking a team likeliest to give Stanford the toughest ride, it's Maryland in the Sweet 16. Maryland is better than the sum of their resume. Maryland has all year been dealing with different injuries. Angel Reese is somebody, that Angel Reese Cameron Brink matchup is going to be so much fun in the Sweet 16. Diamond Miller, fully healthy, is one of the best players in college basketball, period. And Katie Benson is somebody capable of making 6 threes at any time. Same with Chloe Bibby. So Maryland, I think, is the potential toughest matchup for Stanford in that entire region. But my God, you didn't have a Vic Schaefer defense in round 2 going up against either Mike Neighbors' Arkansas offense or the Utah offense of Lynn Roberts. That alone is worth the price of admission in Spokane. Holy cow.
that'll be a lot of fun. All right, so we've gone through the different regions. Obviously, I think the question that's coming up. It's sort of standard. It's like we have to by contract, we at BetSided and every other media organization have to ask about which teams are going to be in the Final Four and who's ultimately going to win.
That's right.
I care about who you're picking. What I really want to know is who the sports journalism protege in your household, Mirabel Magdal, has in her Final Four, because this is somebody clearly on the rise. I think 11, 12 years old that's already dominating at the top of this profession. So if you don't mind giving her picks, those are the ones that I'm going to steal with and then go ahead and use all that money up in Vegas.
I sadly have to get back to you on it because Mirabel and I are doing our brackets tonight.
Okay.
We're actually having a family get together. My younger daughter, Juliet's doing the same. My wife is doing this. My parents are on board for it. So we're having a bracket party tonight. So that I have to wait in order to tell you. And so I have been so busy with coverage. I have yet to fill out my bracket sight unseen. I'm going to give it to you right here. I'm going to give it to you first, which is to say that I think UConn comes out of the Bridgeport region. I think Baylor comes out of the Wichita region. I think South Carolina comes out of the Greensboro region. And I'm going Maryland out of the Spokane region.
All right, so we got 2 1s, a 2, and a 4, I believe, correct, with Maryland?
That's correct.
All right. Who says there's not parity in the NCAA women's tournament, Peter?
Plenty of
It's
parity.
there.
Plenty of parity.
Plenty of parity. Howard, this was great. Always appreciate your insight and your time. Always a lot of fun. I know we mentioned it at the beginning, but amongst all the different places that you're at, where can our viewers, where can our listeners check out all this outstanding coverage before they get their bets ready over for the women's tournament?
TheNextHoops.com is a place you want to go to. TheNextHoops.com or at The Next Hoops. Our team doing the work there is just amazing. We're going to be fanned out all over the country covering this start to finish the way we have all year. You're not going to find a place that gets you better prepared than TheNextHoops.com. There's other stuff we're doing. I'm going to be obviously all over the place too. I'll be in Minnesota for us. But yeah, make sure you're following. And if you can, become a paid subscriber, because these writers are just killing themselves to make this work happen, because we all care so much.
Howard, it's great to see you. Look forward to reading all that coverage. Looking forward to cashing in on our bets in the process as well. We'll have plenty of coverage up over at BetSided on all these different games and matchups, as well as the futures market, which is coming out over at WinBet a little bit later on today. Great to see you, my friend. Enjoy the madness, and we'll have to do this again soon.
It sounds great. You guys keep killing it. I see what you're doing, and it's been fantastic.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.